Good morning, class 7. Welcome back to your chemistry classroom once again. Hope all of you watched the last video. Today I am going to discuss characteristics of chemical reaction precipitate formed. So let's start your lesson and look at your book. Characteristics change precipitate formed. In certain chemical reactions, an insoluble solid substance called precipitate is formed. It is formed when two solutions of soluble substances react. So just underline it. When two solutions of soluble substances react each other, then an insoluble solid substance formed that is known as precipitate. Activity 7. Different reactions between two solutions resulting in information of a precipitate. The precipitate form in a chemical equation is shown with an arrow pointing downwards. So just underline it. Basically, when a precipitate is formed after a chemical reaction, so just indicating it, we use basically down arrow. By down arrow, we can understand it is precipitate. Silver nitrate and dilute hydrochloric acid. Silver nitrate plus HCl. Form क्या हो रहा है? HNO3, I mean nitric acid plus AgCl, silver chloride. So silver chloride is a precipitate after this chemical reaction, and try to understand by down arrow it is denoted. Silver chloride color is milky white precipitate. Next, iron 2 sulfate and sodium hydroxide. Iron 2 sulfate plus sodium hydroxide क्या प्रोड्यूस हो रहा है? Na2SO4 sodium sulfate plus iron hydroxide. So here as iron hydroxide is dirty green precipitate. Next, iron 3 chloride and ammonium hydroxide. FeCl3 plus 3NH4OH. क्या प्रोडक्शन हो रहा है? Ammonium chloride plus iron hydroxide. Reddish brown precipitate. So as well as down arrow and the color, it denotes the formation of precipitate. Next, copper 2 sulfate and sodium hydroxide. Copper 2 sulfate plus sodium hydroxide. क्या प्रोडक्शन हो रहा है? Na2SO4 sodium sulfate plus copper hydroxide. Its color is pale blue precipitate. Zinc sulfate and sodium hydroxide. Zinc sulfate plus sodium hydroxide. After the chemical reaction, it produces sodium sulfate plus zinc hydroxide. Zinc hydroxide का कलर क्या होगा? Gelatinous white precipitate. Gelatinous मतलब ये थोड़ा जेली जैसा होगा. Sticky. Gelatinous white precipitate. Lead nitrate and ammonium hydroxide. Lead nitrate plus ammonium hydroxide. After the chemical reaction, it produces ammonium nitrate plus lead hydroxide. So what is the color of lead hydroxide? Chalky white precipitate. मतलब chalk जैसे उसका color है. So student, you have to learn the color of this particular precipitate after the chemical reaction. Suppose AgCl. What is the color? Milky white precipitate. Same way, iron hydroxide, dirty green precipitate. Same way, iron hydroxide, iron 3 hydroxide का कलर क्या होगा? Reddish brown precipitate. Same way, copper 2 hydroxide का कलर है pale blue precipitate. Whereas zinc hydroxide is gelatinous white precipitate. Gelatinous मतलब it is not a liquid, but it is a like thick jelly-like substance. That's why it is known as gelatinous sticky white precipitate. Same way, lead hydroxide का कलर क्या है? Chalky white precipitate. Chalky means chalk जैसा कलर होता है. Next, characteristics of chemical reaction. Heat evolved. Heat evolved हो रहा है. Characteristics change. Either heat evolved or released. मतलब in case of chemical reaction, heat is required or heat is released through the chemical reaction. In certain chemical reaction, energy is either absorbed or released. Hence, two types of chemical reaction are seen depending on the energy change. Exothermic reaction and endothermic reaction. So depending upon the energy change, chemical reaction basically two types, exothermic and endothermic. Exo means out, endo means intake. A chemical reaction in which heat is evolved, मतलब absorb हो रहा है, sorry, release हो रहा है, and whereas endothermic reaction means and chemical reaction is heat is absorbed. जहाँ पे release होगा that is exothermic reaction, whereas जहाँ पे heat absorb हो रहा है required है that is endothermic reaction. So just mind it, exo means out, endo means intake. In a chemical reaction, whereas energy is released or evolved, that is exothermic reaction, and whereas energy is required or absorbed for the chemical reaction, that is known as endothermic reaction. So activity 8. Different reactions may be studied between reactants in the presence of heat or catalyst or otherwise resulting in evolution or release of heat. Examples are there. Calcium oxide plus water. क्या प्रोडक्शन हो रहा है? Calcium hydroxide plus heat. So that is the exothermic reaction, because after this reaction, heat is released. That is exothermic reaction. Same way, sulfur dioxide and oxygen, V2O5, vanadium pentoxide, that is act as a catalyst, whereas 450 degrees Celsius is needed. Then it produces vanadium pentoxide plus heat. Again, it is a exothermic reaction. Next, nitrogen plus hydroxide. Sorry, nitrogen and hydrogen. It produced iron as a catalyst, 450 degrees Celsius, and it produced ammonia plus heat. So it is also again the example of exothermic reaction. Another is hydrogen plus oxygen. It produces water plus heat. So it is also a exothermic reaction. Next, examples of exothermic reaction in everyday life. Rusting of iron, setting of cement and human body. Rusting of iron, the reaction is slow and the heat evolved is very less, hence unnoticeable. Matlab, in case of rusting of iron, this is very slow process and heat is evolved, I mean release, but it is unnoticeable. Same way, setting of cement. Cement setting liberates heat, hence concrete structures are set slowly. Matlab, when we set cements, in case of building, then it liberates heat, matlab heat release करता है. Hence the concrete structures are set slowly. इसी कारण स्ट्रक्चर को बहुत ज्यादा टाइम लगता है सेट होने में. Same way, human body, many chemical reaction are taking place inside our body and release heat. So it is also a exothermic reaction and provide energy to survive. So student, hope all of you understood what I've discussed in this video. So for today, up to this portion.